Hello, MCU fans! So today we're going to take a look at a question that I continue to get even a year after the movie came out, and that is, what is up with Deadpool and Wolverine? Does it help explain the multiverse? Does it make it more confusing? Like, what is going on? So, lots to discuss. There will be spoilers for the movie, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a September contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, you could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. Plus, hang around to the end of the video, and we'll talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch on the Discord. So one of the things to keep in mind with a Deadpool movie is they're primarily meant for entertainment. I mean, they're not meant to be hugely lore-based, right? I mean, look at the fact that when Deadpool in the first movie is confronted with which Professor X is going to be at the mansion, McAvoy or Stewart, his helpful answer is, these timelines are so confusing, right? And in fact, he made them more confusing in Deadpool 2 by having the wrong X-Men show up at the mansion. He was trying to make a joke about whether the X-Men even exist or not in the mansion, and he used the ones that were, currently filming for Dark Phoenix. But yeah, he only made it more confusing. You gotta love it, right? Plus, when Cable was talking about the fact that he only has 2 charges in his time device, one to get me here and one to get home, he doesn't try to come up with a solution, but says, well, that's just lazy writing. Which it probably is, but that's not the point. He's not trying to solve the problem. And in fact, he doesn't even explain how he knew that Logan died. I mean, that was like in 2029, right? Or maybe he did, because in the No Good Deed video, he legit walks past the Logan movie playing at a movie theater. And then finally, when being offered to go from Fox to Disney, he doesn't give some detailed explanation of how it's going to work. He just says, suck it, Fox, I'm going to Disneyland. So yeah, my point is not to belittle these movies. We love it for the humor. That's the best part of the movies. I'm just saying, I'm not surprised they didn't go into a lot of lore about how the multiverse worked in a movie that's mostly meant to be funny. And as a perfect case in point, I'm continually asked, how on earth did he get to 616 using Cable's device? I mean, it shouldn't have worked that way, right? It shouldn't have let him go to visit Happy Hogan in the 616 universe, specifically the Sacred Timeline. That is not how the device works. In fact, a lot of people ask, doesn't this go against the multiversal model I've been talking about for years now? Basically, where Loki's tree is just 616 and the branches, but all the other universes, most importantly 10005, are not part of the tree. So how did he use Cable's device to jump to a different universe? Well, first of all, we have to look at how this device was supposed to work. Cable himself said, it's a device that lets me slide through time. So basically forward and backward in his timeline. And in fact, at the end of the movie, when Negasonic and Yukio are fixing it and basically letting it have more charges, they say, how does something so small generate enough energy to reverse time? So in other words, they're not talking about anything more than going forward or backward in your timeline. They didn't enhance the device with functionality, they just fixed it so he could use it again. And of course, they regretted it right afterwards, right? What have we done? Well, the good news is, he did start using it the right way. He slid through time to bring back Vanessa, right? Then he slid through time to bring back Peter. Although I would argue that if he brought back Vanessa, that should have rewritten time so that the whole X-Force thing never even happened, and therefore he didn't even need to rescue Peter, but we'll let that go, right? But then he immediately did way more than sliding through time because he jumped into a different timeline, the one with the crappy Deadpool, and then he even jumped to the real world to kill Ryan Reynolds. I love it, those things are hilarious, but that's not how the device worked. And if you believe Once Upon a Deadpool is canon, then he jumped into the real world to tell Fred Savage the story of Deadpool 2, only it was more innocent, harmless, and had a minimum amount of strong language, because of course it was the King James version. So yeah, none of these things should have been possible. But then again, fourth wall breakers do all kinds of impossible things. I mean, She-Hulk broke out of the Disney Plus homepage, looked around until she found the assembled episode, kicked into that, and went to confront Kevin and basically had him rewrite her story. I mean, obviously, there is no metaphysical way to explain how this happened. She just was a fourth wall breaker. Likewise, there is no metaphysical way to explain how Deadpool jumped from 10005 to 616 using a device that only should have let him slide forward and backward in time. But that's okay. He's a fourth wall breaker. He can do these type of things. Now, I'm not saying he didn't actually go visit Happy. He did, just like She-Hulk had Kevin rewrite her history. But it was because of his fourth wall breaking ability he was able to do it, just like he was able to jump into the real world to kill Ryan Reynolds with that same ability. So, yeah, all right, I have no problem with him using his ability to do this, even though the device would not have allowed him to do it. So another question I get asked quite often is, if this multiversal model is true, how come the TVA went from monitoring just 616 to now suddenly caring about all these other universes across the multiverse? I mean, 10005, they pruned Blade, they pruned Elektra, Johnny Storm, seemingly pruned a Punisher. What's going on here? Okay, that's a very good question, and I really, really wish the Deadpool and Wolverine movie had explained more of the transition from the Loki series to the movie. However, I think we can try to figure it out because if you remember in Loki Season 1, the TVA was massive. I mean, what? Hundreds of thousands of people probably worked here, and their job was to prune those extra branches so that the sacred timeline was maintained, right? Well, now if they're no longer pruning the branches, what exactly are they doing? I mean, they don't have a purpose, right? I mean, basically, the loom was winding together the branches that weren't pruned, which we learned from He Who Remains, any branch that would have created a Kang, those were pruned, but other branches were wound in the loom, right? Well, now they've let the loom just be destroyed, and then Loki created his tree, and there's free will, so what are they doing? Well, clearly, they all got together and they came up with a new mission. Now that they know about the rest of the multiverse, which they were unaware of that when they were just monitoring 616, because that's all He Who Remains told them about. But now they can see across the entire multiverse and they realize they need to expand their mission. In fact, they talk about the fact that they're tracking all the different He Who Remains, the different Kangs, across the multiverse. And they even mention that one of them caused a little ruckus in 616 adjacent realm. The very fact they're acknowledging that there's something outside of 616 shows they're looking across the multiverse. Of course, in this case, they're referring to the quantum realm and the situation with Kang and Quantumania and the fact that it's now handled with seemingly his death. But the point is, they're now looking beyond just 616. And actually, if we go all the way back to 2021, July of 2021, Kate Herron, the director of Loki, told us what was going to happen. So first she said, He Who Remains tells Loki and Sylvie in his story that he managed to close himself off and isolate the timeline that we all know from the other timelines. It's almost like they're on an island that's completely hidden from everyone. Wow, way back in 2021, she was telling us exactly what was happening. He Who Remains isolated the sacred timeline behind the loom and hid, basically, from everybody else. And then she said, he isolated the timeline, but now because of what Sylvie's done, i.e. killing He Who Remains, and also the fact that the TVA decided to quit pruning in general, it's almost like it's going to branch. And then those branches are like bridges to other timelines, where the other versions of He Who Remains will be. So notice, it's not saying just branching, creating universes. It's branching which creates bridges to the other timelines, the ones that have always been there. And that's basically what Kang was showing us in Quantumania, right? He said that the universes, he's got one on the top there and one on the bottom, will start colliding because the timelines will keep reaching out and they're going to end up forming a bridge, and that's going to end up creating endless incursions. So, wow, right? I mean, Kate Herron told us basically this model way back in 2021. So, yeah, we're really seeing this all come together perfectly. But the question is, does Deadpool and Wolverine stay consistent with this model? Well, I think that answer is yes, because remember, the TVA used to label everything with 616. They labeled Loki's video Earth 616. They labeled the timeline segments 616.432 in this case. They even labeled the branches. The branches were like 616. Blah, 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 blah. Everything was 616 oriented. That was their entire scope. Well, then suddenly we see in Deadpool and Wolverine this discussion of another universe, 10005. And it's not just a graphic that we saw on the screen here. This is literally how they referred to it. B-15 is talking about someone activating an illegal time ripper on Earth 10005. And we even see on the monitor, they're labeling it 10005. So why would they do that if everything before was 616? Well, that's because it's a separate universe. It's not part of the tree. And in fact, Bo DeMaio said it perfectly. When someone asked him a question, they basically said, hey, Bo, does the fixed points in time call out mean X-Men 97 is part of the MCU multiverse? And he said, I think at this point, we're merely using common language and not necessarily connected to the same tree. oh my word, right? He even says, I think it's a dealer's choice on some levels, but I know all my discussions were to view it as its own neighboring tree, referring to X-Men 97, not a branch of the multiverse MCU tree. Sure, a few leaves from one tree can mingle with another at some point. So yeah, he's basically saying Loki's tree is the multiversal MCU tree, and then outside of it are all these other universes, including X-Men 97. And I think that the Deadpool and Wolverine movie continues to illustrate that by the fact that it's being labeled 10005. It's another tree in this giant forest. Okay, so now let's look at some of the various lines in the movie, and in particular, I'm going to focus on 3 key words anytime we see timeline, universe, or multiverse. Okay, so we have Paradox saying you've been chosen for a higher purpose, a purpose unclear even to me, but one that could save the entire sacred timeline, so he's talking about the 616 timeline, from a possibly grisly fate sometime in the future. And then I think this might be one of the most important lines of the movie. He says, ready for a chance to leave your timeline now and join the greatest universe of all. Well, he'd already called it the sacred timeline. What he's saying now is, you're in a timeline in 10005. Are you ready to leave it and go to the greatest universe of all, 616? So yeah, that's really key how they use timeline and universe there. So then we move into this whole concept of anchor beings. And Paradox says, this is your universe, Mr. Wilson. This is what happens when a universe loses their anchor being. So now he's no longer talking about just one timeline. He's talking about the whole universe is going to die because of the anchor being dying. Now, personally, I think anchor beings are just meant to be meta jokes for, movie studios like Fox that continue their movies even though their main star, Hugh Jackman, is gone. So to me, this whole concept is, well, metaphorical. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's a real concept. Either way, I guess it doesn't matter. The key is that because Hugh Jackman's Wolverine has died, that means the entire universe, all of 10005, all the timelines are going to die. So, he says, your anchor being died in an act of self-sacrifice so epic that it sent shivers down the timeline. So now he switched from universe to timeline because he's talking about particularly the timeline that Deadpool is in, his main timeline. That's going to be destroyed, but ultimately that will wipe out the entire universe because he's the anchor being for all of 10005. So, okay. He then says, I've been tasked with overseeing the end of your universe. And we used to prune these things, simple, elegant, efficient, but I'm told the TVA doesn't like to do that anymore. Well, the multiverse does not need a babysitter. We need a mercy killer, and in this instance, I am the mercy killer. So interestingly, now suddenly he's talking about multiverse. So he's not just talking about Deadpool's universe. He says the whole multiverse doesn't need a babysitter. And he's going to be responsible, in his mind, of wiping out all the dud universes across it, right? Then he says, to wit, I will be giving your universe a swift and compassionate end. All right, so of course, Deadpool doesn't like that answer, grabs the TemPad and uses it to go search for a new anchor being. Now, I think it's key that he was using a TemPad for this. So he is jumping between different branches in 10005 to find all these different variants who were epic and hilarious. But anyway, he's looking for a new anchor being, but who's part of the 10005 universe. He's jumping between branches until finally he finds this one. And he's told, no, you can't replace an anchor being with this. And then they get pruned and sent to the void and learn some really important information from Johnny Storm. He says, you're in the void. Reed called it the metaphysical junkyard. And he says it's where the TVA sends people that don't play nice with the rest of the multiverse. Okay, now they're suddenly referring to multiverse. And I think that's important. I think that means there's only one void across the entire multiverse. And whether you're pruned from 10005 or 616 or Johnny Storm's universe, you end up in the same place. And in fact, we kind of saw that, right? Because I do believe Blade is from a totally different universe, a totally different tree, if you will. Elektra's from a different universe, etc. And yet all of them ended up there. And notice Blade says the TVA decided our universe was dying and I never got a chance to fight for it. All right, so then they get out of the void using Cassandra's sling ring. And I bring this up just because it's always confused me a little bit. She says an amateur magician rolled in here a while back and I killed him, of course, but I found this little trinket on his lovely fingers. Well, if it had had, let's say, the time stone and the space stone, it would have made more sense to me. But instead, time and reality? I don't know. I don't quite get why those are the two stones. But anyway, regardless, again, don't look for a lot of lore in the Deadpool movies, but they're able to use the sling ring to get out of the void. And then once they got out of the void, they had to stop the Time Ripper from being used to destroy their universe. Remember, the Time Ripper is an accelerant. Paradox said, once completed, it will allow me to destroy the space-time matrix of your universe. Okay, here's another reason why I think 10005 has to be a separate tree. Because, remember, in Loki Season 2, we saw that Dox was doing a very inefficient way of wiping out individual branches. The Minutemen were carrying reset charges, right? And that's how they're bombing all the timelines at once. But they had to use the time doors to go to each branch to place the reset charges, and then they were all connected to the central control panel. Well, here's something interesting to keep in mind. Even though they had to set all of these reset charges manually in the branches they wanted to destroy, notice, if they placed it strategically, they could wipe out not only the branch itself, but any child branches. Notice there's several other branches coming off of this one branch. And in fact, we do see that it wiped out everything after it. So theoretically, if you set enough charges in the base timeline, that would wipe out everything. That would wipe out the entire universe. And in fact, that's what we're seeing, right? Cassandra Nova is redirecting the Ripper's power to eliminate all timelines, starting with this one. So here we see again how they're using the term timeline and universe. Every one of these is a timeline, and the goal is to wipe out this entire universe. In fact, Cassandra said it herself. She says, I'm going to use your little Time Ripper, and I'm going to destroy this universe, 10005, and the next, and the next, and the next, until all that's left is the void. See, it actually is very, very consistent with this multiple tree concept. Of course, Deadpool and Wolverine end up saving the universe, but they do also get a bit of a lecture. B-15 looks at Deadpool and says, you led an Omega-level mutant to this timeline. And then she looks at Logan and says, and you shouldn't even be near this timeline. Now, she's not saying that for fear of an incursion, or otherwise she wouldn't have allowed him to stay at the end of the movie. I mean, that would be disastrous. Instead, she made the same decision the Watcher made in What If Season 1 with Black Widow, which is, okay, it's not the end of the world if you don't stay in your own timeline. You can stay here if this is where you would rather be, and, if everyone considers this now to be your home. So, okay, same difference, no problem. He's allowed to stay in the new timeline. And, of course, they get the really good news. Your universe is regenerating. Whatever you did here, you not only saved your world, you spared your timeline from extinction. But, of course, not just their timeline, but the entire universe. Because notice, we see more branches forming. So it's not just one timeline. All the timelines essentially have been saved and seem to be rebooting from scratch. Okay, so did we get our answer on the multiversal model? Well, I'm not going to read all these things here. These are actually the quotes from the movie, the direct quotes, let me say. What I want to focus on is the usage of timeline, that's like Deadpool's timeline that he lives on. Universe, that's the collection of timelines that is 10005. And multiverse, that's the multiverse that includes 616, 10005, etc., all the different trees. So as you can see, they used all of these different terms in the movie, I think very consistently, and sometimes used even more than one term in the same sentence, making it all fit together perfectly. So yeah, I think if you take all of these lines together, it basically fits with the multiversal model I've been discussing, that 10005 is not part of Loki's tree, it's separate. And that ultimately, we're going to see incursions as they go between the different universes. But we don't see an incursion simply because Wolverine went from his original timeline to Deadpool's timeline at the end of the movie. But it doesn't matter what I think, I want to know what you think. Do you think this movie helped answer questions, or did it create even more? And do you think it fits with the multiversal model that I've been talking about? Leave your thoughts, because you know I love to read and respond to everything. And don't forget, we have that September contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the metaphysics section trying to figure all this stuff out. It ain't easy, but it's fun to try to do it as a team. Also, I promised I would talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch. Every date listed here, we watch a different movie or show at 7 p.m. Eastern, leading up to the December 18, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,400 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.